All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Halifax Regional Community Council. As always, the municipality acknowledges that we are on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral unceded in traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people, and the municipality acknowledges peace and friendship treaties signed on this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Approval of the minutes, December 6th. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councilor Mason, seconded by Councilor Cuttle. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, minutes. Approval of additions and deletions. Clerk.
There have been no additions or deletions.
Thank you. Any changes from members? Seeing none, mover to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Councilor Cleary, seconded by Councilor Mason. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Thank you. We have an agenda. Business arising of the minutes, we have none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any? Seeing none from members. Motion of reconsideration, we have none. Motions of rescission, none. Consideration deferred business, none. Notice of table of matters, we have none. Hearings, we have none this evening. Correspondence, petition to delegations. Clerk.
Correspondence has been received for item 11.3.1, and no petitions have been received by the clerk's office.
Thank you. Any petitions from members? Seeing no petitions, starting with the meeting, we have a presentation, 11.3.1, preservation of the Point Pleasant Park Battery, Halifax Military Heritage Preservation Society. And who do we have joining us this evening?
Council. My name is William Breckenridge. I am the chair of the Halifax Military Heritage Preservation Society, and this evening my colleague here will be past chair, Leo DeVoe, will be giving you a brief presentation on thoughts on the preservation of the Point Pleasant Park fortifications and requesting some type of motion out of that. So I'll turn the floor over to Mr. DeVoe. Thank you.
Sorry, before you start looking at clerks, will you be keeping time for? Yes? All right, great. So, floor is yours.
Okay. Can you hear me? Fine. Great. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to present some reflections from the Halifax Military Heritage Preservation Society. We're going to make a presentation to the Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee, but they're not meeting this month, so we thought this would be a good opportunity to speak with the Halifax and West Community Council, because you also have interests in the park as well, particularly along the Northwest Arm. We wanted to share some concerns and some suggestions in terms of what's been happening at the park. As you well know, Point Pleasant Park holds a unique place, not only in the history of Kibutchuk and Chiboucto and Halifax and Nova Scotia, but also holds a national significance as Canada's sentinel East Coast port, location in war and peace. The Point Pleasant Park area along the Northwest Arm was a significant gathering place for the Mi'kmaq, where their St. Aspenquid celebrations were held on the Arm up until 1783. Once the British settlement was established in 1749, for the next 2 centuries, as part of the wider Halifax Defence Complex, Point Pleasant Park served as an important defensive site where a number of fortifications, as you know, and batteries were constructed to guard the harbour, entrance, and naval installations. Halifax was recognized as one of Great Britain's 4 principal overseas naval stations in the 18th and 19th centuries. Here, in this image, is Lieutenant Colonel Hicks's captures a view looking north from Point Pleasant Park. And this, by the way, was just during the American Revolution, when thousands of loyalists were going to soon show up in the city. There are more photos and explanations on our site, by the way, at hmhps.ca, if you want more background on some of these images. And of course, there were different batteries and fortifications along the inner harbor as well during this time, starting at Point Pleasant Battery, the Black Rock Battery, Greenbank, and so forth on the inner harbor. But on the outer harbor, on the Arm, with reference to your council's interests, there was also Chain Rock Battery. There was also the Northwest Battery and the Point Pleasant Battery. And they were all constructed in 1762. And they played a major role in protecting Halifax Harbor and the Northwest Arm. With the exception of Fort Charlotte on George's Island, the Point Pleasant Park Battery operated for the longest continuous period from 1762 to 1945. That's 183 years. This is a wonderful painting here, as you'll see. It's a view of the battery from behind, looking out the harbor. It's painted by Waterloo veteran Alexander Cavalier Mercer, and it was created in August of 1842. It gives you a sense of what the size of the battery was at that time. And of course, the battery was rebuilt many times as it was battered by the storms of the Atlantic in such an exposed location. And it was also because of new armaments during different periods. And other fortifications and batteries followed, including Fort Ogilvie, and of course Prince of Wales Tower, as you know, built in the 1790s during the French Revolutionary War, and now recognized as a National Historic Site maintained by Parks Canada. And there was the Cambridge Battery as well, built in 1862 during the U.S. Civil War. All these fortifications were coordinated between the outer harbor and the inner harbor. There was a relationship between all of them. So this is the outer harbor, as you can see, and then the inner harbor. And as you can see, Point Pleasant Battery played a very critical role in the defense of the inner harbor of Halifax. Following Confederation in 1867, and the young nation of Canada assumed greater control of its military affairs, an agreement respecting the use of Point Pleasant Park was signed in 1875 between the British War Department and the directors of the park, as well as the city of Halifax. And by the way, one of the signatures of that agreement was also later a Nova Scotia Premier and the fourth Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John Thompson. Now, while the fortifications in the park dating from 1762 were built by the British, we have to keep in mind the time frame. And the British wanted what they called a 999-year agreement, which included the payment of 1 shilling a year to the British. And until recent years, an annual traditional ceremony was held in the park, and the shilling from Halifax was presented to the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, the reigning British monarch's representative in the province. It is a unique heritage tradition, and we've advised the Point Pleasant Advisory Committee and have encouraged them to reintroduce it. We've recently heard some comments about decolonizing Point Pleasant Park, but it's important to remember that by the turn of the 20th century, in 1906, when the British forces left Canada, we took up the responsibility and upkeep of these significant fortification assets, which all played a critical role in protecting Halifax and the east coast of Canada during World War I and World War II. We seem to forget how close the war came to Halifax in World War II. And this image is a perfect example of the Hindenburg in 1936 going over the city. And then, of course, as you know, there were signs, when the signs of war was announced, the city became a primary staging area for merchant convoys, supplying critical food, fuel, and other materials to Great Britain. I don't know if you've seen it, but I love the scene in the 1943 Humphrey Bogart and Raymond Massey's film called Action in the North Atlantic, when they're standing on the bridge of their U.S. ship loaded with supplies to Murmansk, Russia, and they're entering Halifax Harbor. And as they view all the ships in the harbor, Bogart states with excitement, "The whole world is here." It's quite a scene in the film. But anyway, that captures that Halifax had that incredible presence at that time. In summary, Point Pleasant Battery, Fort Ogilvie, along with other Halifax defense sites, played a significant role in supporting the Allied victory at sea during the pivotal Battle of the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. The HRM 2008 Point Pleasant Park Management Plan and related studies has identified the effects of rising sea levels and climate change on the park and shoreline, including the military sites, while also outlining the military heritage, cultural, and recreational leisure benefits that the park offers. While certain military and civic fortifications and structures in the park have been designated historic sites, as I've noted with Prince of Wales Tower, as well as the Gatekeeper's Lodge, we at the Society have earlier recommended that HRM register all of the Point Pleasant Park land area as a historic site. Now here we are. It was in the 1890s that the defense installations at Point Pleasant Park Battery were upgraded. And as this image shows, there were 2 linked searchlight emplacements built 80 meters west from the battery, along with an electric generating plant to power the lights. Of importance and concern to the members of our society is the deteriorating status of the battery. Now keep in mind, this is one of the oldest military batteries in Canada, 183 years. The optics look like willful neglect on the part of HRM, kind of like the current state of the old Memorial Library, but we'll not go there at the moment. But obviously, there's some serious deterioration going on the shoreline. This is the interior of the cartridge and shell storage at the Point Pleasant Battery. It shows that there is something there worth preserving and restoring, and that it's not just yet a pile of rubble. Our understanding is that the HRM civic staff have briefed the Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee on requests for proposals for shoreline improvement, as well as an archaeological review of the fortifications, including the Point Pleasant Battery. So with regard to the post-1749 period, as I've outlined, the park and its fortifications are a microcosm of the 18th and 19th century history and heritage of this city. It's exceptional, really. It's accessible, and it's a rich learning experience for residents and visitors alike. And prior to 1749, there's opportunities for the Mi'kmaq and the French to share their narratives as well. And then there is, of course, the eras of World War I and II. The Halifax Sailors Memorial, designed and placed there by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who visited us just last spring to view the site, as well as the state of some veterans' graves in the Camp Hill Cemetery. The memorial, as you know, has inscribed on it 3,257 names of sailors and nursing sisters, merchant navy seamen, and soldiers with no known grave, who were lost at sea. This coming fall, I have the opportunity I'll be in a television production on the History Channel speaking to the sinking of the hospital ship, the Landrovie Castle, with the loss of 258 lives, including 14 nursing sisters whose names are on this memorial. That was one of 5 hospital ships that were carrying wounded men from Europe to Halifax during the war. And it was sunk, as I said, in June of 1918 during World War I. But I digress. I want to show you one other thing besides the Sailors Park Memorial. This is an image, and it's kind of hard to read perhaps, but this just came up this past weekend on the Built History of Halifax blog. And it identifies 19 locations within Halifax where anti-aircraft positions were placed during World War II. Now, I suspect our city councilors and many residents don't know any of this history, let alone visitors.
Just going to ask you you're at time, so just if you don't mind wrapping up.
Okay, thank you. We believe that Discover Canada's driving tourism forward is an important initiative, and we feel military heritage is a very important part of tourism and economic growth. And as a former tour guide in Ambassadors during the summer, I can speak to that. And this is an important ad, for example, from Port of Halifax cruise people. So are there opportunities for funding and support that was done, like, for example, in Sydney to support the Atlantic Memorial Park? We'd like to suggest that with Point Pleasant Battery, if it's not going to be standing and it's going to be entombed, that the appropriate signage and models be presented on these sites so people would at least know what once stood there, not just tear it down and just forget about it. These are important historical elements in our park and to the history of our city. So I thank you for your time. I would hope that maybe a motion might come forward with your deliberations to reflect on what types of recommendations are being made with regards to the fortifications in the park and what types of strategies are going to be used to follow up to ensure that people know that these structures were there at one time and had a reason for being there as well, and respecting that tradition of the military support in Halifax during the war years. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much. I don't see anybody on the board, just looking at members, see if there's any questions or clarification that they may have before we let you go. Nobody's ringing in at the, oh, okay, Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for that presentation and that history lesson. You know, it's always wonderful to learn new things. And I'd love a copy of that second last slide there. In terms of your request for plans, and if I got this right, you're wondering what HRM's plans and strategies are for preserving the history of the Point Pleasant battery. Besides the models, do you have any other ideas or ready to go, or yourself from this group?
Well, in terms of, obviously, because of the weather out there, some sheltered aspect to that. And again, there are plenty of talented people who design these sorts of things for historic exhibitions outside. In terms of a model of what the battery looked like, information about how long it stood there and what its purpose was. And I might add, there's plenty of knowledge within our society to partner with in terms of helping in that effort. But it requires some, some imagination, some vision, and some willingness to do something and not just let something fall into the water or bury it and then forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it was slide 22, but maybe I can get that from you later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation. You mentioned it just very cursorily at the beginning, the sort of Mi'kmaq history in Chibuktuk, especially in that area from downtown to Point Pleasant, as I understand. That was called Spirit Place, and was the birth of the Mi'kmaq Nation, the 7 families. Have you given any thought to it? So Cornwallis shot up 274 years ago. This battery, I think you said, is 188 years old? 183
Pleasant
years
battery, the Point
Right.
Pleasant battery, yeah, 183, yeah.
Have you given any thought to, has your group given any thought to how you could incorporate into the history and the military history, the Mi'kmaq presence in the area, how that would fit with the overall, the batteries that are there, the memorials that are there? And that area is rich in history, from prisons to wartime to recreation. It's very rich culturally. So have you given any thought to how the many thousands of years the Mi'kmaq were there, could it be incorporated in there as well?
Yeah, we kind of see it in chapters. As I mentioned earlier, the kind of pre-1749 in terms of the Mi'kmaq presence for many, many years. And on the Chain Lake Battery side, that's close to where the St. Aspenquid celebrations were done. That's our understanding. And so maybe, in terms of, we've all been to different parks, and you come into it and there's a certain stage of information for certain things. Then you go a bit further and there's another. It obviously has to be thought through. But it's important to include, of course. And then there's the post-1749. I mean, this decolonizing thing is nonsense. We have to recognize and respect. We have to respect the 1749
Sorry,
post. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I can't let a comment like that go.
Okay.
But thank you for thank you for that.
Okay.
So the pre-posts for 1749 is artificial, as being are still here. But anyway, I thank you for your answers.
Okay.
I don't appreciate them, but I thank you for them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cleary.
All right, so no one else on the board. Again, thank you for being here this evening, and I will pass it to Councillor Mason. No? Okay. All right, so we're moving on to next item, information items brought forward. We have none. Moving to reports, 13.1.1, case 24123, amendment to development agreement for the lakes at Brunello Timberley. And who do we have? Oh, no presentation. So I would ask a member of council to put the motion on the floor. Who would like to take that one? Councilor Stoddard?
I move that Halifax and West Community Council give notice of a motion to consider the proposed amending development agreement as set out in Attachment A of the staff report dated January 10th, 2023, to add self-storage facility as permitted use at the links at Brunello and schedule a public hearing.
Seconded by Councilor Cleary. Anything further on that, Councilor? Just schedule a public hearing.
I've seen this lot, and it's been vacant for 3 years. I think the public would like to speak about it. I know there are some concerns, which I won't mention today, but I think they would like to come forward and express themselves, and of course have staff or Brunello respond to them. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilor. Question on this item? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, public hearing is scheduled. Next, 13-1-2, case 24482, land use bylaw amendment to reduce parking requirements for community and recreation centers in Planning District 5, Shabakto. I believe this is Councilor Cotto, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Halifax and West Community Council give first reading to consider approval of the proposed amendment to the land use bylaw for Planning District 5, Shabakto Peninsula, to reduce the parking requirements for community centers and recreation centers as set out in Attachment A of the staff report dated January 11th, 2023, and schedule a public hearing.
Seconded by Councilor Mason. Any further comments, Councilor?
Just some comments. I'm interested in seeing what the community is going to say about this. We did something very similar a few months ago in Lakeside for a community center there. So glad this is coming forward, and yeah, we'll see what happens with the public hearing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor. Question? Question's been called. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, that passes. All right, moving on to members of Community Council. We have none. Motions, we have none. Before we go on camera, I'm just wondering if there's any notice of motion that members like to provide. Nope. There's no added items, so a motion to go in camera, please. Move to go in camera. All right. We will see you in camera. We're good to go. Thank you very much. So we're back in public. We are now going to ratify our in-camera decisions. Counselor Mason.
No, you don't. Hold on a sec. I just accidentally closed the agenda. Sorry, everyone. Oh, you got it? Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right. I move that Halifax Regional Council, I move that Halifax and West Community Council, 1, adopt the recommendations as outlined in the private confidential staff report dated December 14th, 2022, and 2, direct the private confidential staff report dated December 14th, 2022 be maintained private and confidential.
Seconded by Counselor Cuttle.
Sorry.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. All right. So that is, we already asked for those motion, and there's none. Public participation, we have none. I'm not going to even call to the audience because there is nobody there. Date of next meeting is February 13th, 2023, and call for adjournment. We are adjourned. Counselor Mason moved. All right. Thanks, colleagues.